pals, it's Sassy Kassie, and today we're talking cosplay. As always, I'd like to thank all of my subscribers and anyone watching this video. Thank you so much for watching. So today we're going to talk about cosplaying on a budget, or I like to call it thrifty cosplay. A lot of people think that you have to spend a lot of money when it comes to cosplay, but you really don't. So in order to showcase how you can cosplay on a budget, I'm going to be using some examples from my pal Lisa, as well as some of the things that I have done when I want to cosplay, but I don't have a lot of money to do it. So for my first example, I'm going to be using my friend Lisa, her cosplay as Killua from Hunter x Hunter. If anybody has listened to the episode where she talks about Hunter x Hunter, you will know how much she loves Killua, and it was one of the cosplays she really wanted to do, so she went for it. Now, the reason I wanted to start with this particular cosplay as the first example is because it is a very good example of how you can cosplay without having to make anything, especially if you're first starting out, because all the pieces that she acquired, she bought either at the store like Walmart or off Amazon, so she didn't have to actually have a sewing machine or any of the materials really. She was able to put those things together with things that you can probably find in your everyday use. So I actually have a list up and I'll show it on the screen as well. She bought her shorts from Walmart for like $6. She bought a t-shirt for $7. She bought the blue turtleneck that goes underneath his shirt for $10 on Amazon. And she wanted to do specifically the when you first meet Killua during the Hunter licensing exam. So she has a button that has the 99 on it. And she just used a regular button that she repurposed by wrapping paper around it and then writing 99. Super simple. Now, she did say that she did also buy a wig for $15 on Amazon, which honestly is not that bad for a wig. Sometimes wigs can be super expensive. So she didn't want me necessarily to include it, but I decided to include it because even with the wig included, it is a total of $38. Now, I know $38 does seem like a lot, especially when you live paycheck to paycheck and you don't have a lot of extra money to spare. But even if you have just $1 or even $5 to put aside every other paycheck, you can get there in not a lot of time, especially if you're thinking ahead on whatever convention or even Halloween party that you want to go to. So now I'm going to move on to the second example because I feel like sometimes there are maybe steps or levels to cosplaying as you slowly acquire the things necessary, maybe like a sewing machine if you really want to make your cosplay, or, just tools that you have slowly started to acquire so that you can do more and more things, or you needed it for a certain project and now you can use it for other projects. So the second example is kind of showcasing that a little bit. Instead of buying all your pieces, maybe you might buy some, you might make some. It's kind of a combination of both. And I actually have two examples of this that I'm going to showcase here, and they're both cosplays that I have done. So the first example that I'm going to probably show somewhere in here is my cosplay of Katara. She was actually my very first cosplay I ever did in high school, like forever ago. And I absolutely love Katara. And I think that now that I have gotten a little bit more experience with sewing, I would really love to remake it now that I'm better at it. But this will be the picture of my very first cosplay as Katara. Now, as with Lisa's cosplay with Killua, there are definitely some pieces that you can buy, and I honestly, if you are terrible at making pants like me, maybe you should just buy your pants because sometimes it might work out better that way. But also things like shoes or gloves. I still have not mastered the art of making gloves, and I definitely cannot make a sturdy pair of shoes to walk around a convention all day. So definitely take those things into consideration, or just sometimes I keep my old shoes, or I love going to Goodwill, which we'll talk about in a second. I love going to Goodwill and buying just shoes that may fit or that I might be able to repurpose. I think that that is a definitely good way to go. But sometimes your cosplay, like my Katara cosplay, you can't always just find tunics lying around. Like sometimes maybe these days you can, but at least back in the day when I did this Katara cosplay, it was really not easy to find those things. Even patterns, they didn't really have a lot of patterns to suit anime and cartoon needs. They've gotten a lot better these days, but back in the day, they really didn't. So with this cosplay, I did buy things like the pants, the boots, the gloves, but as far as the tunic and the trim went, the trim is actually white bed sheets. for my Katara cosplay. Now the blue fabric, we did end up having to go to Joann Fabrics, which is a fabric and craft store here in the US. I'm not sure if anybody is watching from anywhere around the world, but it is one of the fabric and craft stores we have here. And even though I did end up having to buy fabric, it wasn't necessarily fancy fabric. It was regular cotton fabric, solid color, and it was on sale. Another tidbit, always look for sales. I know at least with Joann Fabrics, there are always sales happening. So sometimes, especially when it comes to patterns, I wait until those sales come around and I compile a list of things I want, and then I go in and get that stuff on sale because I can't be buying full price patterns. They can get real expensive. But anyways, going back just a bit, buying the fabric from Goodwill, buying fabric from Joann's on sale, and also getting ribbon. I cannot tell you how often I use ribbon for things, especially when it comes to like sashes and things like that. You know, you could definitely sew out of fabric, and ribbon may not always be the best option, but I think the ribbon worked really well for my sash for Katara, and I also use ribbon for her little arm bandages, and I just glued them together, put Velcro on it, and they stay in place, and I can easily take them off. Now moving on to my second example that I'm putting in this like second level category, I'm going to be showing you Wendy from Fairy Tale. Now this one, I definitely think is a budget cosplay for me. It's like my peak budget cosplay. I think I spent maybe $20 on this cosplay, and her entire outfit that I made is all white bed sheet and red bed sheets. I know for me, at least, when I can't find the right type of shoes or the right type of socks, or I am not skilled at making socks, it's just like gloves, I buy tights. So I bought those tights. I bought a white pair of shoes at Walmart for $5, and I just used some bias tape with some elastic on the inside and some leftover lace I had lying around, and that's how I made her little garter thing. Now, before I move on to the next example, I will just kind of reiterate that you don't have to go the expensive route, and you don't have to go to Goodwill or thrift stores either. I just know, at least for me, I'm sharing this information with you guys that whenever I want to do a cosplay on a budget, Goodwill is the first place I go, because you sometimes can find, especially if you're looking for things like white or black, just regular colors, it's pretty easy to find those things at Goodwill. And instead of spending money on fabric that may or may not be on sale, sometimes you can find some things there and save yourself a little bit of money. But I will also again reiterate that there is nothing wrong with going to the craft store and buying fabric. I will just also suggest and reiterate this suggestion that look for things that are on sale, especially if it's your first cosplay. You might want to work with something a little bit easier, maybe not stretchy fabrics, because those can be a little bit tougher, especially if it's your first time. And in fact, I kind of recommend going with lighter fabrics like cotton that breathe more, especially if you're doing a summer convention. And even when you're not doing a summer convention, like I said before, it gets hot. So you don't necessarily always want to do the heavy fabrics. Again, this is if you're starting cosplay or maybe climbing your way up to the big cosplay that you really want to do. You don't have to start hard right away. I think that sometimes, especially if you're inexperienced or don't know what you're doing, it's easier to work your way up and work on fabrics that are not as hard until you can kind of figure it out in your brain. And then when you go do that big cosplay, you're just like, all your experiences combined together help you to make it the best that it can be. So for my third example, I actually made a cosplay to go in tandem with this video. Not that I necessarily think that it is a step above the last examples, but this is kind of the stage that I'm at right now, where I have done multiple projects and I have a lot of scraps and random things left over. And even though this cosplay isn't fully made out of leftovers, but I think that would be really awesome to do to kind of get rid of all the random scraps I have, I wanted to showcase what you can do with buying some things and also using the stuff that you have acquired over your other projects. So I will say that going into this video-ish, this idea, that I didn't actually know what cosplay I wanted to do. I kind of, when I first go to Goodwill, when I know I want to do a cosplay on a budget, or I don't have a big budget to do a really big cosplay at the moment, then I have like a list. I'm sure we all have lists if you want to cosplay. You all have a list of characters that you would love to cosplay. So I go in with a list of things that I think would be simple to do, that I think I might be able to find something for, or even if it's not any of those things, I just have a list of characters that I go in kind of in the back of my mind. Then I go to the linen section of Goodwill and I kind of browse through and see what kind of colors and fabrics and bed sheets and tablecloths and whatever else they have there. With all these things in mind, when I went to Goodwill and I saw the most perfect orange for a character that I wanted, I thought it was a sign. I thought it was a sign that I needed to do this character now. So once the orange just made the decision for me, it was time to gather all the supplies. I ended up going to another Goodwill where I bought some dark blue, I bought some pants, I bought a pair of shoes for like $10, and I went from there. So before I talk about which character it is, I'm just kind of going to go through the list of things that I did, and I'm going to separate it. So first I'm going to talk about the things that I've bought for this cosplay and the things that I already had just lying around my house that I used for this cosplay. So I think that it's kind of a little unfair because I had some stuff to go with this cosplay, but I just, again, wanted to show that example of maybe you have some things left over that you want to use up. So I gathered my supplies, which was the orange and the dark blue bed sheets, and I used this for the tunic and the undershirt. I also had a dark brown pillowcase that I used for the collar of my tunic. I bought some black shoes, which I mentioned before, and I bought dark blue pants, which I also mentioned. I bought ribbon for the bandages, because I told you guys before I like to use ribbon for that sort of thing. And then I had some thick blue twine that was kind of like rope for this crossbody section thing that I had. I also got some thin twine for the cross stitch on he has like this little hip shield. I got some paint for colors that I didn't have, which was yellow, a darker gray, and a brown. And I got some black elastic for the armor, and then I bought some thread. So with all of these things, I know this seems like a lot, but as far as the bed sheets go, I didn't spend that much money on them because I did get them from Goodwill. The same thing with the shoes and the pants. For the ribbon, I did go to Joann Fabrics to buy this, but it was definitely on sale. I think there was like a 40% off sale on ribbon, so I didn't even pay full price for it. For the thick, like blue rope twine, I did also get that on sale at Joann's. For the thin twine that I used to kind of cross stitch, that was regular twine I got at the Dollar Tree, so it was $1. And then I just painted it the color I needed it to be. And luckily for me, I already had those paint colors. As far as the paint goes, I bought little bottles because the things I needed to paint weren't that many. And what's great about, I think I got Apple Barrel, I think is the brand. Some of them I got at Walmart and they were only 54 cents a bottle. So that really isn't that much, even if I were to buy like 5 bottles. But if you were to get those like maybe at Joann's, I think they're still like $1. So really not too bad in the spending department. The black elastic was not on sale, but luckily it's only like a couple of dollars and I didn't need that much. And then the thread I also got on sale. Overall, again, not too bad as far as spending goes. Now we're gonna go to the other half, and I have to write this down because it was such a long, not a long process, but I did it so swiftly that I can't remember every step that I took, so I had to write it down. So the second part is all the things that I had lying around for this cosplay. So patterns. Like I mentioned a little bit before, I don't like to buy patterns for full price because a lot of the patterns that I like are like $20, especially if you buy like the really cool costume, fun Halloween type patterns. They can be really expensive. So sometimes with Joann Fabrics, they have pattern sales where you can get like 5 patterns for $1 each. So you spend $5 for 5 patterns, you're saving like hundreds of dollars. And this is a really nice way to buy those $20 patterns and only spend $1 on them. So I have a ton of patterns in the back, which I guess again gives me kind of an unfair advantage because I already had some of those things. But as part of this video, I am letting anyone know that there are ways that you don't have to spend a lot of money. And in fact, I don't even spend full price on patterns because I think that's kind of ridiculous. So for this, I used a kimono pattern. I used a dress pattern that I actually shortened to make the shirt that I used. And then I used an apron pattern and an armor pattern. Now, the next thing I had, some of the things I had kind of lying around are notions. Notions, for anybody that doesn't know, are things like that, like snaps or Velcro or things like that I just have extra lying around. And again, you don't necessarily have to buy these things from a craft store. I know, at least for me, or maybe other people that live in the US, that the Dollar Tree, at least the ones around me, have been kind of expanding their craft section. So there are a lot of times when I go there and I can just buy dollar Velcro, dollar snap packs. It's super easy. Then you don't have to spend a lot of money on it, and you can kind of just keep like a backfill of things because you just never know when you're going to need a snap or never know when you're going to need Velcro or elastic. things like that. I sometimes, when I'm at the Dollar Tree, I just try to grab a couple if I know I'm running low, and then I just have some, so for my next project I don't have to go buy it and I don't have to spend a lot of money on it. Now, another thing that I had lying around, we talked about having leftover fabric or scraps. I had some light brown fabric just lying around from another project that I used in tandem with the dark brown fabric that I used. I also talked about the armor pattern that I got, or that I used for this cosplay. Now, I have done a cosplay where I did some major armor building, and I bought a lot of foam for that, and I saved up a long time for that because that one is one that I knew I was going to have to spend a little bit more money on. But I had so much leftover foam because I overbought. One, because I thought I was going to mess up, and I definitely did. And two, sometimes when you buy a pack, it's cheaper than buying them individually. So I just had some extra foam for the purpose of this cosplay. Again, one of those things that I kind of have a disadvantage of when I'm doing this cosplay and I'm talking about it because I already have those things lying around. However, foam doesn't necessarily always have to be expensive, even though it can be. I know for the purpose of this cosplay, I used 2mm foam, which is just your regular craft foam that you can get in the kids section, but I bought a big roll for like $7. So that's not too bad considering I've used it for multiple cosplays. It can last you a long time, especially if you want to do some simple cosplays that require a lot of like smaller armor pieces. I will also note that I did have an extra 10mm foam board that I did use to make something else for this cosplay that I'm not going to put in this video just because I don't consider it to be super thrifty, and I also thought it would be fun to do a fun bonus video, but we'll see whenever I can get around to editing that because that's just going to take a while. Now, thread. I did say that I bought thread for the specific purpose of this cosplay, but that's because I wanted it to kind of match the specific orange that I was using. To be honest though, a lot of times when I'm doing cosplays, I just use white or black thread. I don't always match the color, and I do have a lot of random thread colors that I have just somehow acquired or people have given me. But sometimes if I don't have a specific color and I can't afford to buy the thread, I will just use black or white. Most of the time black thread because I find it goes well with a lot of things. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm sure some other cosplayers will say that you have to match the thread color to your fabric, but again, if you're trying to find ways to maybe save a little bit money on your thrifty cosplay, you could just use white or black thread. I also had a lot of interfacing lying around. Now, if nobody knows what this is, it's kind of like this really, I don't even want to say brittle, but it's easy to tear apart. It's something that can go on the inside of your fabric and you kind of iron it on, and it helps it stiffen the fabric, helps it keeps its shape. So I try to have interfacing lying around at all times because as much as it's like a pain sometimes, it really does help whenever you're doing cosplay. And interfacing can be expensive depending on the thickness. I try to keep just a regular, like thin interfacing, especially when I do random little side projects that I'm like, it again doesn't necessarily need super thick interfacing, and you can get some of this 99 cents per package if it's on sale, or sometimes even 99 cents per yard at Joann Fabrics. So it doesn't even have to cost a lot again to get interfacing. Another thing that I think everybody should just kind of have lying around, just random paintbrushes. And it doesn't even have to be expensive. I know the perfect example for this, actually, I had a friend that was working on a cosplay, and he was talking to me about working on this cosplay because I also cosplay. And he was saying that he was having a hard time because the next step that he wanted to do, he needed to use his paintbrushes for, but he didn't want to ruin his nice paintbrushes, so he's been kind of putting off that step in the process. And I told him something that I do a lot is I go to the Dollar Tree again and buy dollar packs of paintbrushes. You can get the ones with the sponge on them. You can get the ones that are just flimsy, whatever you need to use them for. Yes, I have there's a regular set of paintbrushes that are maybe a little bit nicer, not super expensive because I'm not an artist, I'm not a painter, but I also have plenty of random sponge paintbrushes and random kids craft paintbrushes that I got from the Dollar Tree, and those are perfect whenever you need to use things that may ruin them, like contact cement, and you don't have to worry about it because it's just a random $1 or 25 cents if it came in a pack paintbrush that you could just use for that purpose. Now, speaking of contact cement, I also have a big can of contact cement because, again, I did do another project which involved lots of armor pieces. So I bought a big can because I had a little can and I used it all, and so I decided to buy the big can. That being said, contact cement can be rather expensive, but if you have smaller projects, you can buy a little can or a little tube for $7, and it doesn't have to be very expensive. You don't have to buy the big one. I just bought it because I had a lot of armor pieces for this particular cosplay, and I didn't want to have to go back to the store to buy more. Even though this whole video I've been talking about things that you don't have to spend a lot of money on, I do think it's important to note that there are some things that I would say, like if you're gonna spend money on something, spend it on this. And that would be probably tools. So in the purpose of armor, buying a heat gun is really important because it makes the foam more flimsy and malleable. So if you want to make a circular shape, you can bend it into that circular shape and hold it, and whenever it cools down, it holds that position. Of course, it's helpful to have the contact cement so you can stick it together and it'll stay that way, but having a heat gun is super important if you want to do a lot of things with armor. I also think it's super important if you're doing armor to have a hot knife. When I did my other armored cosplay, I did not have a hot knife. I cut everything out with an X-Acto knife and I regretted every second of it. I have a hot knife now and I used it to make my bonus project, and it made things 10 times easier with that 10mm foam. I cannot tell you how important it is to have that hot knife, and I got it for $15 on Amazon. Other important things to have, especially if you're doing armor, stuff like this. This is basically like heat-resistant duct tape, though it still will burn if you just hold the heat gun there. But the reason I got this is because I live in an apartment and there I don't have a garage and I don't have a lot of places to do hardcore projects. So I found something online when you don't have space or a garage or things that you can easily do stuff, that you could get a board or maybe a foam board and you can cover it in this, and then you have a surface to use your heat gun and your EVA foam so that you're not burning your carpet or burning down your house. Now again, this will burn through if you just hold the heat gun there, but this is a very nice solution to if you need to do something and you don't have a house to do it at. This is a nice solution for that. There are a lot of things that you can just have around, like pins, especially if you're sewing. You're going to need those pins to hold your fabric together while you're sewing. Things like that I already have lying around. Those are things that you probably know if you are at this point in your cosplay journey, or even if you're starting cosplay. You know, those are things that you know that you need to have, and just, again, look for those sales. They don't have to be super expensive. You can even get a starter kit at Walmart for like $7 to $10, and it'll come with fabric scissors, a little tomato, some pins, a little light measuring tape. It doesn't have to be expensive to have all those things. There are two other things that I have that I think are really fun, easy things that you can just repurpose. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is ads. Everybody gets ads in their mail. At least in the US, I know we all get ads in our mail. And while it's really annoying and you throw them away, I try to keep the matte ones, not the glossy ones, but like the matted ones, because a lot of times, especially in cosplay, there's not, again, patterns for what you need. So sometimes I take patterns that I do have, or sometimes I have to make my own patterns and I draw them out on the ads and then I cut them out, because in a sense, they're kind of not super the same consistency, but kind of the same consistency as pattern paper. So it makes it really easy to draw it out with Sharpie, cut it out, and then you can label it however you want, and you can easily stick pins in it through whatever you're trying to do. It works really, really well. So the other thing I want to mention before we move on, and I know that I'm going through a lot of things and this isn't even everything that I just kind of have in my arsenal, but something else that I think would be fun to share with all of you is, because we talked about painting. And some people feel like you have to have a special easel or things that put your paint on, and you really, really don't. I use this fun piece of cardboard as my easel. I've had it for many, many years, and cardboard is something that almost everybody can come by, especially if you have a package and you break down a box, or, you know, Christmas time, whenever everything is in a box, just save one of those boxes, save a piece, and you have a perfect easel that will last you a while, and you don't have to buy anything expensive. So that is the general gist breakdown of things that I went and got and things that I kind of already had in my arsenal, because now I'm going to share with you what actual cosplay I've been talking about this whole time. So if anybody is a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, then you will recognize this character. His name is Jet. He is from the very first season and the second season of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I was inspired again because I've been wanting to do this cosplay for a little bit because I listened to the Braving the Elements podcast, and Dante Bosco has had this slight obsession with Jet, and I've been wanting to do it for a while. And so when I was browsing through Goodwill and I found that perfect orange bed sheet, I just decided that Jet was the one that I had to make. I just had to do it. Had to. So I hope if you guys know this character, or at least I'm gonna have a picture of him up right now, that you will kind of see where I'm going whenever I was explaining all the things that I bought for this cosplay. But we're gonna go through it just a little bit, again, the process that I used to make this cosplay. So my first step was I sewed the clothing together. I actually made the shirt first. I had a dress pattern that I shortened to make a skirt because I liked the sleeves. I thought the sleeves looked like how I would want them to look for the purpose of this cosplay. So that's why I chose this pattern, but I needed to shorten it so that it would be a shirt like it is for the actual character. The second thing I did was the tunic, and I used a kimono pattern for this, but I didn't fully use the kimono pattern because obviously I didn't make a long one, and the one that I used actually had ties in the bottom, and I didn't do the ties. I just did the actual kimono tunic part. I didn't use the sleeves, and then I just took the dark brown pillowcase and used that for my collar and my trim on the bottom. The next thing I sewed together was the quote-unquote apron, and if you notice from that picture again that Jet has these like side hip pieces. He's got some weird brown thing that looks like an apron, but on the other side he has kind of like a hip shield. So I used an apron pattern for the brown part, and again I had some random brown scrap fabric that I had lying around, like a light brown, and then I used my dark brown pillowcases again to outline that so that I could get the look I was looking for. As far as the other part, the hip shield, we're going to get to that in a second, because the next part in my process for doing this cosplay was cutting out the armor and gluing it together. So as I mentioned before, I had armor patterns from a random pattern that I had bought previously because I wanted to do armor. And I cut out the shoulder pieces and quickly realized they were way too big for my little shoulders. So I had to modify them. And this is where those ads came in handy, because I drew out the patterns and then I put it against my shoulder, and I was able to slowly cut away at it till it was a shoulder size that more appropriately fit me. And then once I did that, I made that pattern and then I stored it away in case I ever need to make shoulder patterns again. I have shoulder pads that are the size of my shoulders. The other thing that I had to do was make his weird shaped shoulder pad. So I used the base of the regular shoulder pad so I knew where the curve was, and then I kind of made the shape. Now originally I made it way too big, and I slowly cut away at it until it was the right size that I needed it to be. And once I got the size and the shape that I wanted, I then put that on the ad paper. So that way, again, if I ever want to make this again, which again is a very specific shoulder pad, but if I ever wanted to make Jet's shoulder pads again, I have a pattern that fits my shoulder that I'm able to use. For the arm gauntlets, they had a pattern and it had multiple pieces, because I believe for that pattern, the gauntlets went all the way around. But for mine, they don't go all the way around. So I only used half of that pattern and then slowly shaved it away so again, it would fit my arm. Once I did that, again, I transferred it onto the ad paper, titled it, cut it out, so that way if I ever have to make it again, I know what size it needs to be because I already have a pattern for it. So for my hip armor, luckily there are a bunch of rectangles, so I was able to measure my hip out and see how far I wanted it to go around, at least for the bigger part, and then slowly make the other two pieces smaller, and I was able to cut those out on my ad paper, trace them onto my foam, and then I was able to cut it out of the foam in the exact size that I wanted and needed. Now for the next step, the glue and ultimately painting was slightly tricky. For this one, I didn't really use my heat gun that much because 2mm foam is so thin that I was able to bend it a lot easier as opposed to my 10mm foam, which is a little bit more difficult. But once I cut all the pieces out and I had the halves together, I will say that I did forget to cut the edges at an angle, so they didn't fit together perfectly, but it still worked out pretty well. I was able to glue them. I also should mention that if you're gonna use armor and contact cement and be heating up your foam, you really should have ventilation. The unfortunate thing for me is that I do not have a balcony, so I actually sat by my front door of my apartment with the door open and a little craft table that I got forever ago, and I just sat there on the floor and I was gluing, and I had my little mask on so that I didn't inhale anything. But yes, really important to have ventilation. I should have mentioned that before. Now moving on to the painting portion, I primed it with gesso or gesso. I never know how to pronounce it. It's Gesso. It's this really nice like primer type thing that you can prime things that aren't always meant to be painted, because foam sucks up a lot of paint. It just sucks everything up. And granted, I should have done the process where I paint over it with Mod Podge, because that makes it a little bit easier of a surface to take the paint without sucking everything in. But I didn't think that far, at least until I got to his swords. I did a layer of primer with the gesso, and then I went in with the different grays and metallics and even a brown to give kind of like that rusty kind of look, because I wanted his armor to look a little worn. I also mentioned before that I had twine that I used, and he has like those weird cross stitches in his hip shield, and I used just regular white twine that I got at the Dollar Tree, and I painted it blue, which I already had in my arsenal of paint, and I just painted it blue, and when it dried, then I was able to thread it through one of these weird giant sewing needles that I just happened to have out of nowhere, and I used that to make that happen. I will also say for the hip shield, I actually glued that together with contact cement before I painted it, and then I put the stitching in, because I didn't want the stitching to actually hold it together in case it didn't work or it didn't hold well. So that way, even if the stitches came out, the armor would still hold together. Now comes the step where you attach everything. So I already talked about gluing all the armor pieces together and painting those, but you know, like the hip shield also goes on the apron. So I could have glued the EVA foam to it, but 2mm EVA foam you can actually just sew. And yes, my machine did make a small imprint on some of my things, because I also sewed the elastic onto the shoulder pads and the arm gauntlets and things like that. But at least with the hip shield, I was able to just sew it right onto the apron, and it just fit perfectly. That's also when I added the stitches. And I honestly thought I was going to ruin it, because right before I had, you know, the twine was threaded, and I was like, I'm about to poke a hole and ruin my entire project, but I didn't. It turned out okay. So, whew. I also, again, added that blue rope cord, the thicker twine, to the shoulder pads so I could get that crossbody thing going on. And now the final step of the cosplay is to wear it, to show it off. So I'm going to show a picture here. I might retake a picture, so it might not be the picture that I have right now, because it was late at night, my roommate was asleep, I was trying to take a selfie and it really wasn't working out. And I also think that the way my hair is right now works better for Jet, so I might retake the picture after I record this and then use that instead. I know that was a really long way and it was still like a lot of explanation, and I really wish I could have just shown a video of me actually constructing it, but I am not really good at those. I often forget to record, and then at that point I was like, I'll just walk you through the steps and show you the pictures. Again, this video is all about Thrifty Cosplay, so all the examples that I showed you, even the one that I did for the purpose of this video, was all done through Thrifty means. Now I have a breakdown of how much this cosplay, the Jet cosplay, cost me, and it was a total of $43.93. Now that is definitely more than I wanted to spend, because I would love to keep it under $40. But again, those shoes, which I actually have here, are actually $7.99. I probably didn't need to buy those. I could have repurposed one of my other shoes and just painted them black, because I have just a random white pair of shoes. But overall, under $45, not too bad, especially if you consider sometimes when you buy like store-bought cosplay, they can cost over $100, and that is just a lot. That's like a lot of saving. And granted, it's a lot more time saving as opposed to money saving, and if you want to buy your cosplay, that's totally okay. So many people do that. Even Lisa has done that for some of her cosplays. I am not saying you can't do that, but again, this video is for people who want to do their cosplay but don't think they have a lot of money, and I just wanted to showcase with previous examples and a present example how you could go about doing that. So just a couple of wrap-up points. Again, I use bed sheets, tablecloths, pillowcases for things all the time, and I think they turn out pretty okay. And again, I think the most important thing when it comes to cosplay is that you have a love of that character and you want to showcase that love of the character by cosplaying them. It doesn't have to be the most amazing cosplay that you win cosplay contests with. It really doesn't. I just think that as long as you have fun with it, that's the most important thing. I also want to reiterate again, another wrap-up point, that even your supplies don't have to be super expensive. Your paintbrushes, your painting easel, buying things on sale definitely is a big plus. If you're gonna spend money on things, especially if you know what kind of cosplays you want to make, if you want to make things like armor, it's really important to have those tools. Or something like a wig. Sometimes a wig is really, really important. It's going to be on your head all day. You don't want it to be too small or uncomfortable. You really want to make sure that, if you're going to buy a wig, spend it on the wig. I know with Lisa, her Killua cosplay, she didn't buy contacts because they were just a little too expensive for her. But if you're going to spend something on one thing in your cosplay, maybe you want to buy those contacts. Pick and choose the things that you can maybe save for, or if you know you want to do an exact cosplay, saving your money to spend on things like wigs and contacts, but you don't necessarily have to do that as far as the clothing is concerned. There's really are ways to cosplay thriftily or save your money for things that you really want to spend your money on. And lastly, again, I just want to reiterate that you can start small, start easy, start like Lisa did, and just buy the clothing pieces, and then you can buy a wig, and it's done and done. Or you could start maybe at the second examples that I gave, where you buy some things and you maybe want to try your hand at the tunic or the skirt or whatever. You don't have to start big, but definitely give yourself some grace. Cosplaying is, I think, an art that we can all enjoy, and it doesn't have to be perfect because, again, the most important thing with cosplay is that you love this character and that you want to showcase your love for that character. That is all I have to say about cosplaying on a budget. I hope this all helps you. I know Halloween is coming up, which is why I wanted to time this video this way. If you wanted to make a cosplay for a convention, or maybe you wanted to do it for Halloween, that would be great. But anywho, thank you for watching, and until next time, bye!